Welcome to Training 5, Reviewing a Resource. Whether you are submitting or reviewing a resource, being able to accurately identify the attributes of the formative assessment process with relative ease is essential to determining its quality. After today's session, you'll not only be more familiar with the formative assessment process, you'll have models and resources to help you develop your expertise further and the expertise of your colleagues. This slide intends to provide helpful reminders of issues that have surfaced over the first year of SNE member contributions. Throughout this training, keep in mind that although we present ideas for improving a resource, none of the ideas necessarily suggest the return of a resource. All resources can be improved upon, but this should not keep a resource from being posted if it meets the quality criteria. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Resources are only required to include one attribute of the formative assessment process. If you indicate your resource covers an attribute, it should exemplify that attribute. Ensure that your resources are viewable, accessible, and working properly. When reviewing a submission, feedback should be based on specific quality criteria. Resources should only be returned if they do not meet the quality criteria. Feedback should be actionable and tell the submitter what the resource needs to meet the quality criteria. Now let's do a quick review of the formative assessment process before we review the sample resource together. Formative assessment is a deliberate process used by teachers and students during instruction that provides actionable feedback that is used to adjust ongoing teaching and learning strategies to improve students' self-assessment, reflection, and attainment of curricular learning targets and goals. All of us are very familiar with the 4 attributes of the formative assessment process. The learning goals for Training 5 include SNE members will understand the relationship between the quality criteria and the 4 attributes of the formative assessment process, and have a common understanding of the quality criteria resulting in inter-rater reliability. Upon completion of Trainings 5 and 6, SNE members will be ready to participate in the review of digital library submissions. SNE members can effectively review and submit quality resources for the digital library and provide evidence of inter-rater reliability. When applying the 4 attributes to the quality criteria for instructional resources, we should find the following. If the submitter identifies the resource as demonstrating the first attribute, clarify intended learning, you should see that the resource clearly articulates learning goals for students that reflect the Common Core State standards. The resource clearly articulates success criteria for students. The resource is designed coherently so that all content aligns with the learning goals and success criteria. If the submitter identifies the resource as demonstrating the second attribute, elicit evidence, you should see that the resource contains one or more strategies or methods to help teachers and/or students elicit rich, ongoing, instructionally useful evidence of student learning. Note how we added teachers and/or in brackets. Teachers, at the very least, should be eliciting evidence of student learning. If the submitter identifies the resources demonstrating the third attribute, interpret evidence, you should see that the resource helps teachers and/or students analyze or interpret one or more sources of evidence generated as part of their coursework. If the submitter identifies the resources demonstrating the fourth attribute, act on evidence, you should see that the resource promotes student engagement and accountability as a learner. Instructional resources should focus on the student. When we apply the 4 attributes to the quality criteria for professional learning resources, we should find the following. If the submitter identifies the resource as demonstrating the first attribute, clarify intended learning, you should see that the resource reflects research and/or the principles of effective professional learning. The resource clearly articulates learning goals and success criteria for the educator. The resource is designed coherently so that all content aligns with the learning goals and success criteria. If the submitter identifies the resource as demonstrating the second attribute, elicit evidence, you should see that the resource includes tasks and/or strategies to elicit evidence of educator learning. If the submitter identifies the resource as demonstrating the third attribute, interpret evidence, you should see that the resource provides a way to analyze or interpret evidence. If the submitter identifies the resource as demonstrating the fourth attribute, act on evidence, you should see that the resource provides opportunities or recommendations for responsive action to evidence. The resource also enables educators to actively engage in the assessment and learning process. Professional learning resources should focus on the educator. Now we're going to review the formative assessment process in a sample resource. Recently, your state leadership team member sent you a link to this resource in the digital library. As we walk through this review, we will note the strengths as well as areas that could be further improved. As a professional, you will need to determine if any improvements would require the resource to be returned. In this case, none of the suggestions would require a return to the submitter. When reviewing a resource, all documents and the cover profile must be taken into consideration. We will begin with reviewing the documents provided with this resource. If you have not already reviewed or downloaded the documents, please pause this presentation and do so now. Let's look at the teacher's notes first. The teacher's notes provide a summary of how teachers and students can use this resource to review, evaluate, and analyze student test results. Note that the resource suggests this as a post-assessment activity, but think about how an educator makes this work as a continued, deliberate process of informing instruction. The notes emphasize that before handing the assessment back to students, the teacher should mark the answers right or wrong without providing any comments. Then students are to review their own tests and categorize their understandings and misunderstandings. The notes provide questions to guide the teacher in reviewing students' work, questions to students, and suggestions for modifications to the class activity. The resource also gives suggestions to the teacher on how to conduct this activity for the first time by providing tips on modeling and having students work in pairs. The resource includes a handy Math Strategies handout for students that consists of 2 parts, a math toolbox and the literacy strategies they will use as they complete the activities provided in this resource. The 2-page Math Reflections directions give step-by-step directions to students on how to fill out the worksheets included in the activity. The directions guide students in how to label each test item, which column to fill out according to the item response and teacher's marks, and how to complete a reflection about their own understanding of the problem. This is the first handout that students will fill out when they receive the educator's feedback on a test and is used to record their reflections item by item. The teacher's notes detail how students categorize their learning into 3 columns by indicating the question in the first column of each row and filling in one of the 3 columns in each row accordingly. Page 2 of the Math Reflection Directions detail how to fill out each column. The 2-page Math Reflection Summary gives step-by-step directions to the student on how to fill out the next 3-column worksheet, as well as guidelines for writing a narrative statement that requires students to summarize their learning in complete sentences and detailed paragraphs. Most importantly, these guidelines provide detailed guidance on how students can interpret their reflections to guide future work. This is the second handout that students complete and consists of 3 columns for them to build on their reflections from the first worksheet. Guiding sentence frames are provided directly on the worksheet, with the instruction documents providing more in-depth guidance and sample responses. The third worksheet is a lined paper that students use to write a longer narrative about their learning reflections. The Student Guidelines document provides guiding questions to assist students in completing this step. Finally, this resource includes a detailed sample of student work. It has 4 pages, including the 4-column reflection, 3-column reflection, and the summary, all written by the student. As you can see, providing sample student work within a resource greatly enhances its usability as a support for teachers. So let's get into each attribute as they appear in the resource. Note on this slide the elements of Formative Assessment Attribute 1. On the cover profile, we see that the submitter did not identify Clarify Intended Learning as a focus for this resource. Further down, the submitter provided the learning goals and success criteria. Every cover profile must provide this to pass gatekeeping criteria. When submitting or reviewing a resource for Attribute 1, Clarify Intended Learning, consider these questions to ensure alignment with the quality criteria. Review the cover profile to determine which standards are identified in this resource and determine if they are accurate. The author has tagged this resource for a number of standards, but there might be an issue with these identified standards. From the student's sample work, we know it's about algebra. Without the sample, this activity could be used for any content standard. The cover profile lists 7 out of 8 math practice standards, which can be applicable to the content to which this resource applies. Without specific content standards, the best we can say is that it meets Math Practice 1, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them, which is not listed on the cover profile. The tags should represent what the resource covers explicitly, not what the resource could cover. Also keep in mind you don't want to over-tag a resource. Let's look at the next question. Are the learning goals and success criteria clearly articulated? Refer to the cover profile to determine how well they are described. How could this element be improved? This resource could be improved by including the goals and success criteria directly in the teacher notes and/or student handout, since the cover profile is not downloadable. But this is not required because the submitter did not identify and tag Clarify Intended Learning as a focus for this resource. Finally, as a reviewer or contributor, you want to make sure the content of the resource successfully achieves these goals and meets these criteria. You will need the evidence in the resource to make a judgment if you are a reviewer. After thoroughly reviewing all documents of this resource, we ask whether the self-reflection exercise will achieve the stated learning goals and meet the success criteria. The sample student work provides the evidence. In summary, a reviewer would not necessarily return the submission for the improvements, but comments could be added so that the submitter considers them in a future submission. For Attribute 2, elicit evidence, let's look at several sources of evidence for providing strategies or methods to elicit evidence. The teacher's notes provide strategies for completing the activity for the first time, such as modeling and pairing. Student worksheets consist of 3 pieces: the 4-column reflection, the 3-column reflection, a reflection summary. These activities provide different avenues to elicit evidence of student learning. Recall from the Math Strategies document, students are provided with a math toolbox and literacy strategies to assist them in successfully completing the activity. Each of these strategies could be used to align with the Common Core standards for mathematical practice. The resource did not directly tie these strategies to instruction. Although this is not required, we know we could improve this resource by incorporating the math strategies in the teacher's notes and directions for completing the reflection activities. After reviewing this resource, do the strategies and methods effectively elicit the evidence needed to meet the intent of the lesson? Are the supporting documents clearly presented in a concise yet thorough manner? Even if modifications are not required for posting to the digital library, how can the resource be improved to ensure access for all learners? Take a minute to reflect on these questions. Attribute 3 is clearly evident in this lesson, as the activity is centered around student self-assessment of their own work. Consider how the supporting documents titled Math Assessment Reflection support this attribute. Note that this resource provides clear instructions on how students are to analyze and interpret their own work. The level of complexity in the directions and template indicate that students are likely accustomed to such guidelines and use them regularly throughout the year. For this resource, the teacher's notes provide this background knowledge for the end user. In evaluating other resources for review or submission to the digital library, it is helpful to consider the questions on this slide. Take a minute to reflect on these questions. Attribute 4, Act on Evidence, was not tagged by the submitter for this resource. However, in the cover profile, the contributor includes, near the end of the section for specific connections to the formative assessment process, the teacher can discuss each student's finding with them and adjust instructional plans to ensure the student meets the standards that were assessed. Additionally, recall in the math reflection summary, the student directions say, you should list specific strategies you can do next time to improve your results on future assessments. Also on page 2 of the teacher's notes, there's clear direction on how the teacher uses the evidence to provide individual feedback and future instruction to ensure learning of the essential concepts. The contributor of this resource identifies and tags only attributes 2 and 3, elicit and interpret evidence, on the cover profile. As mentioned previously, attributes 1 and 4, clarify intended learning and act on evidence, are present, but the focus of the resource did not explicitly articulate or develop either of these 2 attributes. Lastly, when submitting or reviewing a resource, consider the section on the cover profile guide that describes the connection of a resource to the formative assessment process. Note the suggestions for how to provide a rationale, context, or supplemental materials if a resource lacks an explicit connection to one or more attributes. We hope that the opportunity to review a sample resource has enhanced and facilitated your ability to review resources more efficiently, and to ensure also that your own submissions are of high quality. Thank you for participating in the Training 5, Reviewing a Resource. Please remember to send an email to your SLT member indicating completion of this training. Your SLT member will contact you shortly with dates and times, as well as provide the sample resource for discussion during the Training 6 live webinar. You won't want to miss this opportunity to collaborate.